Well, howdy there, folks. James, Political Friar, coming to you again. I think you'll be shocked to see the University of Oregon cap on today, considering the news. I'm going to be talking about Joe Biden. And this topic is historical in nature. It's happening right before our eyes, but it will be analyzed by historians for, as long as we can remember it, which is going to be a while. And so this first draft of what may have happened is something that I feel like I ought to contribute to. And that is to do some reporting and analysis over what we know happened to Joe Biden. But this is going to probably take more than one video just because I want to keep these things relatively short. And so I'm going to break this up into some discrete topics that all reference in the title to these videos. The first one here is why. Why did Joe Biden drop out? And not just why did he drop out, why did he drop out when he dropped out? And to answer those questions, we're going to have to do a little bit of an analysis of a concerted public pressure campaign, one that we've seen play out in other fields and areas to get candidates to do something that they don't want to do. Well, it's never actually happened to a president in not running, at least that we know of. Something similar just very well could have happened and probably did happen to LBJ in 1968, but we don't have the sources on that one. I think we probably have better sources on this one now than we do on the one that happened, what is that, 50 plus years ago. So let's talk through it. Concerns about Joe Biden's age were present in 2016 when he was a primary candidate for the office of President of the United States, or he would have been a primary candidate, except that Barack Obama had concerns about Joe Biden's age and his ability to serve two terms at that point. He would have been in his 70s by the end of the second term. And so Barack Obama, being the sitting president, gave the nod to Hillary Clinton. And you know what? Joe Biden was pissed. He had just spent 8 years by this guy's side, and he was going to be told that he wasn't even allowed to run in the primary against Hillary because he's too old. That's upsetting for sure. But Barack Obama made the decision for the party and for the country that Joe wasn't the right guy. And so the Democratic Party establishment lined up behind the sitting president, the relatively popular sitting president, and said, okay, we'll go for Hillary. Now, Bernie Sanders led an insurgency campaign from the left and ended up making that primary more competitive, but have no doubt that Joe and Hillary would have been in the same lane. The only thing Joe could have done if he had actually defied Obama would have been to boost Bernie. And he didn't want to do that either. So Joe sat on his hands, got a job with the university, took some classified documents home that he shouldn't have, and more or less receded into what could have been a retirement. And obviously it wasn't. Come 2020, he decided he was the only guy who could beat Donald Trump. He was a well-known name, white male, moderate seeming, at least compared to Bernie Sanders. At least he occupied that lane. And so he decided to run. The reports are largely at the behest of his wife, Jill. Says, you have to go save America. And Joe ran. And he won. He not only won the primary with the help of folks like Jim Claiborne in the Carolinas, but he managed to truly unite the Democratic Party around a single idea that Donald Trump could not become president for the second term. And that was enough to get him over the finish line, despite the fact that, boy, Joe Biden in 2020 was too old. He was soft in the head already. He couldn't get through public speaking events. He had a reasonable performance at those debates in 2020, but those debates were much more characterized by Donald Trump's failure than Joe Biden's success. Joe Biden was the replacement candidate X. And when he got elected, he did a reasonable job of being replacement President X. He made a few truly consequential decisions that history will have to pick apart and evaluate. The one that comes first to mind was his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. Or I suppose if you're going to be a partisan in his favor, his decision to keep Donald Trump's commitment to withdraw from Afghanistan. He didn't have to do that, but that's a different video entirely. Then he actually managed to pass a bunch of legislation. He had a very narrow but functioning government in the Congress, and he passed major bills, huge spending bills, all of them. And we will be living with the consequences of the Biden administration's fiscal policy for a long time. It's too early to tell whether it was a good idea or not. I think that the very first COVID bailout that he did, which was basically a mirror of the two previous COVID bailouts, was probably a bad idea. The other bills, the infrastructure bill and the basically green bill that he passed, were maybe okay. We don't know yet. We'll have to find out, and history will, in time, will show us. Then the other major decision that Joe Biden made that history will evaluate is his decision to back Ukraine, and I think history will look very favorably upon Joe Biden's treatment of Ukraine, and I think they'll look fairly favorably on Joe Biden's treatment of China and Taiwan, in that he built up a bit of a multilateral alliance out in the Western Pacific, something that had never been seen before. He finally had to go back to politics, though, and in 2022, the Democrats did better than they ought to have. Again, I think that was a Donald Trump phenomenon, not a Joe Biden phenomenon. The folks that Donald Trump backed in primaries did poorly, worse than a normal Republican would have. But when Joe Biden moved from being president, the job of president, to president, the role of candidate, and the role of communicator to the American public, well, he demonstrated that he wasn't up for the job. He just wasn't fit for that part of the job. The parts of the job that involve administering the country, making big decisions, well, I think Joe Biden, at least the Joe Biden administration, has done a fair job. The Joe Biden administration, as far as public communications and rallying the country around a cause and making sure that folks understand not just what the president's doing, but why and why they ought to support him, he did a poor job. And I don't think it's because he wasn't interested. I think it's because he wasn't able. He was already too old. And it didn't become blindingly clear such that the folks that are also the powers that be in this country couldn't ignore it until his debate against Donald Trump in June. Now, a part of me wonders why this debate happened as early as it did. See, people knew. People around Joe Biden knew that he was soft in the head. There's no way that he hid it from everybody, and everybody was covering for him. And of course they were. That's what you do in politics. I don't resent them for that. And the folks on the right who want to paint that as a scandal, well, they're mean spirited. It's not necessarily a scandal that a person got old. It is not necessarily a scandal that in politics a candidate's weaknesses would be concealed. That's politics, not a scandal. The debate was early. It was in June. Now, normally debates, maybe the first one's in August. You'll have it in August and September and October. June, well, I wonder whether they didn't see this as an opportunity for Joe Biden to either silence his critics early enough so that the age issue would go away, or potentially stub his toe early enough that he could be replaced. Well, stub his toe he did. I will always remember the words that somehow, some way, we beat Medicare. Oh, Joe. Oh, Joe. And that Donald Trump could have the kind of, and this word is overused, but it's perfectly accurate, unhinged debate performance that he had and still win. Wow. And at that point, certain elements of the Democratic Party concluded that Joe Biden was not fit to run to be president for the next 4 years. It's certainly not fit to run for president. Even if he was fit to do the job of being president, he couldn't run for president for the last 2 years. And those Democrats who came to that conclusion after that debate are named Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama. Their wing of the Democratic Party, which is the biggest, came to that conclusion about Joe Biden after the debate. And you saw it in their responses when they were asked about it. They were always uniformly supportive but concerned, supportive but concerned, or this or that. And that's when a planned public pressure campaign to have Joe step aside began. And it was something that we have seen before. It involves statements of concern and support of supporting Joe Biden in making sure that he's okay. Concern for Joe. We love Joe and we want to make sure he's doing fine. Not a full throated. This is not an issue. Because as soon as it got embraced as an issue, the age issue among Democrats, it stopped being a partisan concern. See, anybody can resist a partisan attack because you have your own partisans. But once the attack stops being partisan and starts being broader based, as in Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama aren't jumping to your defense, that's going to be really difficult to resist. And Joe Biden doesn't have a faction of his own within the Democratic Party the same way that those two do. I mean, he has his loyalists, but it's lesser than. He's the sitting president, but again, this guy ain't a great communicator. He wasn't out building a political base. If he was, well, he would have been able to survive it. But if he could have done that, then he would have. He couldn't. He couldn't communicate to that level. He wasn't that good of a retail politician anymore. And that's because he's too old. And so the fundamental issue came back around. He's too old. It's already soft in the head. So coming into the time period between the debate and his actual resignation today, and examining some of the ways that Pelosi and Obama, and I'm going to just say it, orchestrated this campaign to convince Joe to drop out. It began with the lowest level folks who had already been talking about Joe Biden dropout. You're talking about media personalities, you're talking about pundits, and saying, "Boy, we'd be better off with another person on the ticket." You got a number of New York Times columnists who wrote pieces saying for Joe to drop out. You had the New York Times editorial board saying with a clear, unified voice, drop out. You had the Washington Post saying, drop out, Joe. You saw the liberal media, and that doesn't mean that they're necessarily unthinking, by the way, but they are liberal media, just the same way that the conservative has the conservative media. You can still get good analysis out of the conservative media, just like you can get good analysis out of the liberal media sometimes, but they were willing to participate in an actual pressure campaign. And so every New York Times columnist, save one, wrote at least one column saying, drop out, Joe. I did 2 videos saying drop out, Joe, in that period of time. So I guess I deserve a little bit of credit in this part of the pressure campaign too, don't I? I mean, Pelosi didn't text me, but I got a message, And so the campaign began there. And as Joe insisted that he wasn't going to, it escalated. And it escalated to low-level, low-name recognition, but highly vulnerable elected officials saying, hey, I'm going to need you to drop out, Joe. So this is Pat Ryan of New York, who's in a very competitive district. This is Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez of Washington, who's in a very competitive district. These are the folks that said, drop out, and they really were saying drop out for their own purposes. They thought that Joe Biden at the top of the ticket was going to make their chances of getting reelected worse. And you know what? They were right. Then you had a cadre of folks who were old guard Democrats who were not actually in electoral trouble, but had the opportunity to be the elder statesmen. And the foremost among these, in my mind, when I'm looking at the lists of folks who slowly dripped out, was Earl Blumenauer of Oregon. He is a stalwart liberal, very far to the left and well known among progressive circles. And he said, drop out, Joe, for all the same reasons. You're just too old, man. And I think you can put some other folks into that same category. Oddly, Joe Manchin is another person whose political career is basically over, who, despite that, has a very high name recognition. He said, drop out, Joe. So senator from West Virginia, by the way. And Joe resisted. Joe says, no, I'm not going to drop out. I'm not going to. He leaks stories about how it's his wife who's encouraging him. And he tries to go on one-on-one interviews. The one-on-one interview with Stephanopoulos, the one-on-one interview with Lester Holt. He doesn't do well enough in those interviews. He's still a gaffe fest. He still can't quite handle it. He does a speech, a press conference where he takes questions from the press, and for 60 minutes he had good minutes and bad minutes. Kind of like old people. Old people have good days and bad days. Well, it didn't help. It just reinforced exactly the point that everybody was making. He's too old. And so the next escalation was having high name recognition Democratic House members who weren't in political power. So that's where you get Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin saying, drop out, Joe. Jim Costa saying, drop out, Joe. This is the level where you've got people who don't have personal reasons to want Joe to drop out, and who actually are now making the case that it is about the country and it is about the Democratic Party. And these folks, they're not household names, but they're names. They're people who have served on important committees, who have been on TV, who have made news themselves. Adam Schiff is running for Senate in California and is likely to win. That's not an insignificant post in this country, and so Joe gets that, but it is just another level of pressure campaign. Another level of pressure campaign was Nancy Pelosi. After Joe Biden had stridently said, I'm not dropping out, when Nancy Pelosi was asked, same day, Joe says he's not dropping out. Nancy Pelosi doesn't say, okay, I take him at his word. She says, well, that's Joe Biden's decision. If that's not a dog whistle, I haven't heard one before. I guess I haven't heard dog whistles because I don't have the higher, register hearing. But wow, that was not an endorsement of support. And Obama dodged all of this. Obama isn't as easy to corner. He's not going to be nailed down. But I'm sure he had something similar to say. Well, it's Joe's decision to make. Yeah, it was, I suppose. But finally, you get some of the other, high name recognition senators. You got Sherrod Brown and Peter Welch joining Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin saying, "Drop out, Joe." That's the next line of escalation in the escalation campaign, or in the campaign to get Joe to drop out. Now, the escalation beyond that would have been folks that are out of office but high name recognition casting doubt. You would have probably at this point had to have Obama say, I'm concerned. Or you would have had to have Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton say, I'm concerned. That would have been the next thing. Now, we didn't see that level of escalation because Joe dropped out. We would have also seen the reins come entirely off. There would have been a roster of Democrats in the House and the Senate becoming increasingly more senior and higher name recognition, either casting doubt or actually saying drop out. You might have got Hakeem Jeffries eventually saying, boy, we could use another candidate. It would have happened. I have no doubt that Nancy Pelosi is capable of lining these folks up and saying on July 22nd, you're going to tell him, on July 23rd, you're going to come out, on July 24th, you're going to come out. And it would have been very difficult for Joe to resist the pressure. And if he had resisted the pressure, there would have been blood. There would have been the type of political infighting that doesn't get forgotten, all the way up to the ultimate escalation, which may very well have been telling the delegates at the convention to vote their conscience. See, there's an in good conscience clause in the convention. So the delegates that Joe won in the primaries are bound, and if they say in good conscience they can't vote for the person to whom they're bound, well, they can vote for somebody else. And that would have been a campaign that Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama would have engaged in. Now, it's a bit unknown the degree to which the other sort of vestual faction within the Democratic Party, the one led by the Clintons, would have supported or resisted that, but probably couldn't have stopped it anyway you looked at it. And so Joe was seeing the walls close in on him, to borrow a popular phrase from the mainstream media, usually applied to a different septuagenarian presidential candidate. He saw the walls closing in around him, and so he came to the conclusion that he was going to need to drop out. But why did he drop out when he dropped out? Why didn't he rather drop out sooner? If this pressure campaign was clear as day, why didn't he drop out sooner? And that comes down to some kind of really mundane stuff that is more about media literacy than it is about politics. See, Joe is that you've seen the meme, the cat hanging from the tree by its claws, and says, "Hang in there, little buddy." Well, his hang in there, little buddy, was about his stubbornness and his ego and his hope for news. Maybe the news would change. Maybe something would save him from having to do this thing that he didn't want to do. And so, as Donald Trump knows, if you don't want to confront a problem, then delay it. Well, the Joe delayed it, and he got some help. The news did help him. The first bit of the news that really helped Joe Biden stay in this race longer was the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. That dominated a few news cycles, and it should. But it made it so that the people, the pressure campaign that was against Joe Biden, drip, 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 the drumbeat of people dropping out, well, they didn't have any airspace in the media. The oxygen was all taken up with Donald Trump and the assassination attempt, likewise with the VP pick. You had no one in the media who would go out and report on another congressman saying to drop out to Joe because they were speculating on the Veep stakes. And the fact that Donald Trump put on a TV show about it just made that better for Joe Biden to stay in the race. After that, you got the convention. 4 days of the media not having as much attention to pay to Joe Biden and the people asking for him to drop out. Although you did note that through the convention, the pressure campaign restarted. You did get folks every day coming out. Now, it wasn't above the full headlines because those were convention, but it didn't die. And the convention ended. And then the people coming out saying, drop out, Joe, started getting above the fold again. That started becoming the important thing that the media was reporting on. And the pressure built. Joe had another little break in that he caught COVID. I think the reason why he dropped out this weekend instead of earlier last week is because he got COVID. And he was going to be able to say, listen. I got to focus on COVID. Let's deal with this later. Well, there was no later. The timing became critical. If the Democrats are going to get a replacement candidate in place, they needed Joe to drop out sooner or maybe now. Or they could not wait any longer. And this is stemming from a law in Ohio. Ohio requires that the candidates for president be nominated before August 7th. And the Democratic convention is scheduled for after August 7th. And so if you don't get a at least titular roll call vote done before August 7th, well, you end up with no Democrat on the ballot for president, which is embarrassing. And potentially not a problem, but we'll talk about that when we talk about the folks who will be succeeding Joe Biden in the process that they'll be nominated with. But if you're going to not just surrender Ohio, you needed Joe to go. If you wanted to even have the option of not surrendering Ohio, Joe needed to go. And so the Biden camp actually threw out a couple of other potential delays. Jill's going to go to Paris to open the Olympics, and you don't want him to have to try to make Jill a lame duck first lady when you go to the Olympics. Joe wanted to meet Benny Netanyahu while he was still running, where he wasn't a lame duck. That's weak sauce. We got a poll over the weekend from Michigan. Michigan, that state that Democrats have to win. That one looks like a mitten. It's got oopers. Those are the people in the Upper Peninsula. It showed that Donald Trump was beating Joe Biden by more than 10 points. That's insurmountable. And it was driven by the public pressure campaign to get him to drop out. And it was driven by fundamentally the fact that Joe is too old. He is incapable. He is not fit to be president for the next 4 years. Now, a short message to my Republican friends out there who think that because he's not fit to be president for the next 4 years, he's not fit to be president for the next 6 months. Cute talking point. It's not going to play. That is going to be a partisan issue that Joe Biden will resist. So just put the pipe down and realize that that dream is going to go ahead and evaporate into nothing. Joe Biden will be president until January 20th, at which point somebody else is going to be president. Anyway, that's just a thought. Let me know what you think about all that in the comments down below. Wait around. We'll see how many of these videos I can get out and how quickly. But we're going to talk about the mechanics of nominating a replacement and the politics of nominating a replacement, and some speculation about who those replacements might be, and some speculation about how the race might look between those replacements and the Republican candidate for president, Donald Trump. All right. Well, I really appreciate you. Like I said, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, put a comment in. Everything you do that interacts with this video, including viewing it, makes it so other people see it too. So I really appreciate it. Thanks.